Happy New Year and to the January 3rd meeting of Troy City Council. I am Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. Brock Heath, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Ladies, pray with me. God, we just want to come to you here today and give thanks for everything you've done for us in 2016 as we transition into 2017 here. We're excited about all the opportunities that are going to be before us and challenges. God, just help us to get through those. God, help us to be an avenue to reach others. Open our hearts, minds, and ears so that you can feed through us what you want other people to hear through us, God. Allow us to give less focus on ourselves and our situations and desires, and focus a little bit more on your plans in 2017. It's going to be an amazing year, God, with your blessings and favors all over us. We receive those and accept those. In your name, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath.
Here.
Mrs. Oda.
Here.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Swazer.
Here.
Mrs. Snee. Here. Mr. Tremblay.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mr. Twilliger.
Here.
Mr. Kendall.
Move to excuse Mr. Kendall.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Phillips to excuse Mr. Kendall. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee. Yes. Mr. Tremblay.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall is excused.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the December 19th meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, December 19, 2016. Committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee reported that committee recommended legislation be prepared approving the First Troy Corp annexation. Recreation and Parks Committee provided a majority and minority report related to the recommendations of the Troy Recreation Board and the Troy Board of Park Commissioners related to placing a limited term 0.25% income tax increase on the May 2, 2017 primary election ballot for the purpose of funding park and recreation projects. The majority report supported the levy and emergency legislation. The minority report supported the levy but not emergency legislation. Following, there were then comments that followed. Resolution number R56, 2016, resolution specifying May 2, 2017 as the date of submitting to the electors a proposal to increase the municipal income tax was given first reading. Ordinance 060, 2016, accept application of annexation of certain territory. That was the First Troy Corp annexation, was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 061, 2016, an ordinance authorizing submission to the electors of the increase of the income tax was given first reading. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:44 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We'll continue with committee reports. We have a report this evening from the Community and Economic Development Committee and Chairman Mr. Twist.
Thank you, Madam President. The committee met on December 19th regarding the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that the final plats of Section 2 and 3 of the Halifax subdivision be approved. Both sections are in general accordance with the approved preliminary plan. There would be a total of 11 building lots in each section. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared accepting the final plats of Section 2 and Section 3 of the Halifax subdivision as presented, including the dedication of the right-of-way, and that is respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swazer, and myself as Chair, William Twist.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twist. The Personnel Committee this evening has a reappointment for consideration. Mr. Terwilliger?
Thank you, Madam President.
Mayor Beamish has requested the reappointment of Shirley Snyder to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Loan Review Committee. I would like to move for the approval of the reappointment of Shirley Snyder to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Loan Review Committee for a new term commencing immediately and ending on December 31st of 2020.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Mr. Terwilliger and seconded by Mr. Phillips to approve the reappointment of Mrs. Snyder. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Are there any other committee reports? Okay, thank you. We now open the meeting to citizen comments. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Kerber is our timekeeper. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address before addressing council.
Hi, I'm Anthony Lombardo from 242 Robin Hood Lane. Just to address the recreation issue, I'm sure others have talked and will talk about the increased need for ice time with Hobart Arena. But I want to share just a little bit of a different perspective. If it was not for Hobart Arena, I would not be standing here right now. About 6 years ago, my wife and I were looking for a new town to call home. One of our requirements was a hockey rink. I'm a teacher in Inglewood, and 2 of my former students have moved to Troy, at least in part because of hockey at Hobart Arena. I know 1 other family that has moved to Troy because of youth hockey, and I know 2 other families that plan to move to Troy for that reason. So what I'm trying to say is that that Hobart Arena has helped Troy to grow. It has brought new families to our community, and I'm living proof. Just imagine what 2 rinks would do. I envision Troy becoming a hotbed for hockey, a place where several leagues can flourish, a place where youth hockey teams have plenty of ice time, and a place where tournaments draw visitors from faraway places, injecting money into our community, into our economy. You can find many adult hockey tournaments across the nation. There's one that I participate every year in Carmel, Indiana. To apply to host such a tournament, at least 2 rinks are required. I've spent hundreds of dollars myself on lodging and meals alone for this one tournament. And there's dozens of teams, 14 players on each team. Oftentimes they bring their families with them. And youth hockey tournaments would have the same draw. And all these people, they need a hotel to stay in, restaurants to eat at, places to shop. And Troy has many of these to offer. I'm a Troy Bruins youth hockey coach. I'm also an adult hockey league player here in Troy, and I'm a Troy resident who sees nothing but good things for Troy should this pass. So I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll move on to the resolutions then and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R56, 2016.
Resolution number R56, 2016, a resolution specifying May 2, 2017 as the date of submitting to the electors of the City of Troy, Ohio, a proposal to increase the municipal income tax rate by 1/4%, 0.25%, to be used solely for parks and recreational purposes, and directing the Board of Elections of Miami County, Ohio, to conduct the election and declaring an emergency. This is the second reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
No.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
No.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R1, 2017.
Resolution number R1, 2017. Resolution authorizing the sale during calendar year 2017 of municipally owned personal property which is not needed for public use or which is obsolete or unfit for the use for which it was acquired by internet auction pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 721.15D. This is a piece of annual legislation that the council is asked to adopt to permit the city to use internet auction sites through the year as there may be surplus property, but any property with a value of $1,000 or more must be specifically then authorized by council. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
I move to suspend the rules. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Tremblay and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay.
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Heath to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
The resolution is adopted.
Move on to ordinances and ask Mrs. Knight to read ordinance 061, 2016.
Ordinance number 061, 2016, an ordinance authorizing the submission to the electors of the City of Troy, Ohio, an increase in the city income tax of an additional 1/4%, 0.25%, to be used solely for parks and recreational purposes, to become first effective January 1, 2018, and ending December 31, 2027, and declaring an emergency. This is the second reading. This is a companion piece of legislation to R 56, 2016.
Are there any questions from council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
No.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Phillips, sorry.
Move to adopt.
Sorry.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda.
No.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 01, 2017.
Ordinance number 01, 2017, ordinance accepting the final plat of Halifax Estates subdivision, Section 2 and Section 3, in the city of Troy, Ohio, and dedicating right-of-way. This has been recommended for approval by the Troy Planning Commission. The final plats conform to the preliminary plan. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Twist and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 02, 2017.
Ordinance number 02, 2017. Ordinance changing the zoning of parcel D08, 012-080, part of in-lots 936 and 937, and part of outlot 5 in the city of Troy, Ohio, from the zoning of M2, Light Industrial District, to B2, General Business District. The rezoning has been recommended for approval by the Troy Planning Commission. It is the address of 214 South Mulberry Street. This will have a public hearing at the next meeting. First reading.
This will go to a second reading. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 03, 2017.
Ordinance number 03, 2017, an ordinance amending section 1143.16 of the zoning code of the city of Troy, Ohio, and enacting section 1149.13 and section 1149.14 of the zoning code of the city of Troy, Ohio, related to retail dispensaries, cultivators, and processors of medical marijuana within the city of Troy, Ohio. This has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission, limits the location to such dispensaries to the B4 district, and for a total not to exceed 3 within the city. There will be a public hearing at the next meeting, first reading.
And this will go to a second reading as well. That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
Only to note that in the absence of the mayor, we distributed his annual report.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, do you have comments this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some scheduling items for you, some of which are in the items of interest. Christmas trees are now being picked up, live ones, of course. Please keep them free of any debris. Have them out at the curb. We will pick them up until through January. Martin Luther King Jr. Day on January 16th is a city holiday. However, we will be on regular schedule for trash and recycling. We are also in our 4th round of leaf pickup. Believe it or not, there's still piles out there. The 4th round will end at the end of this week, weather permitting. After that point, then we will reassess whether there's still some and probably pick up the stragglers, again, depending on the weather and other workload, but we'll try to get them as much as possible. And based on the current forecast, which is, as you know, always subject to change, you may see Thursday night, Friday morning, the crews out brining, striping the all of the main, secondary, and local roads in anticipation of the possibility of some, as the street foreman says, dusting of snow on Friday, possibly Saturday as well. Just in case you get any questions, that is what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, that may not happen depending on if the weather pattern changes. It is supposed to get extremely cold the next couple of days, but again, the weather forecasters are hedging their bets as they usually do this time of year. That's all I have. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Kerber, do you have any comments this evening?
I would just add that I've also included my office's annual report, and council should have a copy of that as well.
Thank you. I would just like to thank all the city employees for their service this past year, and wish them a very happy new year and successful new year. Mr. Schweizer, are you still on the Martin Luther King Jr.?
I am. I've tried to be
Committee?
in contact with some of the other organizers, and I have not got anything back from them
Okay,
yet.
so we don't know if there's a walk or not this year.
No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay.
I will let you know.
Are there any comments from council members tonight?
I do, Madam President.
Mr. Phillips?
Excuse me. To answer the question at the last council meeting that you'd posed to me about the Operation Recreation Treasurer designation for the upcoming election in May, the answer is yes, we did have to have a treasurer, and we have gotten a volunteer, and that is Mrs. Penny Hoekstra. She will act as our treasurer for the Operation Recreation. She is in the final minutes probably of compiling the post-general election report. She has been waiting on a couple of items from donors. And as soon as that's done, we're hoping tomorrow that that report will be filed.
Okay.
Was there anything else that I failed to?
No, I think that was it. I was just interested. And then she'll be taking care of the next election
Yes.
as well,
Yes.
coming up?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Any other council members? Any comments from city staff this evening? Anyone in the audience have any comments? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peaceful week. Thank you.